Fuller.
Yes, my Lords, when I made this amendment, which is now number 25 at the committee stage, the lamented Lord Khan went as far as he could at that point to open the door to accepting the principle that when the electricity storage systems are planned, it is with the full knowledge, connivance and consent of the local fire authority so that the fire and public safety risks and mitigations are fully understood. So I'm disappointed that the meeting to discuss this is scheduled for after completion of this report stage. So rather than agreeing my sensible, proportionate and non-controversial proposals, I fear that precious time is now being wasted litigating it on the floor of your Lordship's House, and wholly avoidably with additional time spent in the division lobbies. Now, my Lords, as the grid is reinforced and the ability to stabilise and isolate the electricity supply from surges and shocks is essential, and the number of long-term and short-term technologies exists to smooth the path of electricity from the generator to the consumer, and LDES facilities are part of that mix. These solid-state devices are needed alongside rotational energy sources in the energy balance. Now, the people of the Iberian Peninsula, to where I'm travelling when the House rises this evening, will attest to the consequences of failing to have network stabilisation in place. A tiny 0.2 Hertz perturbation in the grid set in train a chain reaction that brought down their entire grid, which required an unprecedented black start. Now, that's what's at stake here. Now, some of these long-term storage technologies contain highly flammable materials like lithium, but hydrogen storage could be another possibility, but I'm going to restrict my remarks to lithium for the purposes of proving the point. Now, not a day, excuse me. Now, not a day goes by when a fire isn't caused by a lithium battery in a car, a refuse freighter, when a block of flats, when a scooter overheats. The issue is clear. When a lithium battery catches fire, huge quantities of water are required to extinguish it. I won't remind you excessively about the details of the car-based conflagration at Luton Airport, but once it took hold, the batteries in electric cars quickly made the fire unfightable for longer, more so than had petrol and diesel been involved alone. Now, Lord Berkeley reminded us in committee about the ship, the Felicity Ace, whose cargo contained 4,000 electric vehicles, including Porsches, Audis, Lamborghinis and Bentleys, which caught fire and sank off the Azores. Lithium batteries in the electric vehicles on board kept that fire burning until the ship was consumed by the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I can see some faces on the government benches who aren't really shedding a tear at the prospect of the Lamborghinis and Bentleys ending up in Davy Jones's locker. But the issue of fire does need to be taken seriously. This bill, as drafted, fails to do so. It glosses over the consequences of failures in the long and short-term energy storage, including large-scale battery storage systems and their risks. You don't need to be a bright spark to realise that an electrical spark can be dangerous when mixed with huge electrical capacity, flammables and oil-rich transformers. Now, many of the proposed LDS and BESS schemes, Battery Electric Storage System, BESS, schemes in particular are in the countryside, where the existence of hydrants is few and far between. Rivers and ponds may be far away across the fields or along narrow lanes. Water carriers may be miles away. And during a dry period, a deep-seated, hard-to-fight fire can spawn secondary blazes that run wild across a whole area. By contrast, in the towns, proximity of other businesses, schools, homes and buildings adds a dimension of public safety to the mix. So when there's a fire, local residents are told by the fire brigade to keep inside, close windows and doors, noting that when these fires occur, they can last for hours or days and produce toxic emissions. So there must also be consideration of the leakage of lithium, in particular to the underlying aquifer from the firefighters' runoff. Now, at committee, it was said, so this is a serious matter, but at committee it was said that, don't worry, there's a national organisation, the HSE, which is the competent body to assess the risks of an installation catching fire. And that may well be the case, and it may continue to be so. But that's only part of the story. Once an installation is burning, then all the warm words and soft soap from the HSE headquarters in Bootle, miles away, count for nothing. When you dial 999, it's not the HSE that turns up mob-handed, it's the local fire brigade and the local planning authority with possibly emergency tents and residents' refuges. National bodies such as the HSE just don't have the staffing, the powers, the equipment or the local knowledge to pick up the pieces appropriately when the deep-sea fire gets out of control, or indeed to anticipate the local consequences. So that's why we must ensure that local fire services are not only consulted but properly resourced to assess and manage these risks. Any developer seeking to install large-scale solar must be required to engage with emergency services and contribute fairly to risk assessments and preparedness. That's what my amendment seeks to achieve. And again, at committee, it was suggested that my amendment would place a new and unwelcome burden on the Fire Authority. My Lords, that suggestion was straw-clutching from the Minister, because it's those organisations that have pressed me to act. For them, this amendment provides the safeguards they need in the fulfilment of their statutory duty. So this amendment would enforce the duty for an applicant for an energy storage facility and the local fire authority to fully assess the risks, including for fire and public safety, and pay a reasonable fee to do so, then everyone can be forewarned and forearmed. Why would any government wish to resist this? So if the government does resist this stipulation, then I will consider testing the opinion of the House, so that we can all dip our elbows, so to speak, in understanding the risks of uncontrollable fires to people, property, businesses and the environment at the significant cost to the wider taxpayer. Government exists to protect the public. Why would government act so recklessly by not accepting my proportionate proposals? I beg to move.
Amendment proposed, clause 25, page 34, line 33. At the end, insert the words.
Very keen to divide the House on this important matter, but during the debate a number of issues have come to mind, not least the meeting held today by the Minister Shanks, and also the acceptance that we're still owed that meeting where we can do this. So I think rather than detain the House at this point with a division, it would be, I wonder whether the Minister and I might have an understanding that we keep the date in the diary, and if not satisfied, then the opportunity comes to bring this back at third reading. But I do, before concluding, just want to explain that, complacency can be easily misheld. We were complacent about the oil field transformers at Heathrow that exploded. The world's second largest battery energy storage system in California was consumed last January. Rather than fight the fire, they just had to let it burn out. And these are really important issues. And just because, well, we've got down to 0.7% or whatever, I'm afraid isn't good enough, because these things are multiplying. They're growing like Topsy. And from the occasional installation, we now have them in urban areas, countryside areas, whatever. They should be regulated. And I am reassured that the Minister is going to consider this. And I just wonder if between now and the 30th, we might still distill some of that knowledge, and in so bring back a more important amendment, possibly divisible, on when we get to third reading on this stage. And with that in mind, I beg leave to withdraw my amendment.
Is it your Lordship's pleasure that this amendment be withdrawn? It is by leave withdrawn. Clause 26, Amendment 26, Baroness Taylor Stevenage.